I was 22 years old when I met the man who swore he was the love of my life. Back then, my life was simple. I worked during the day, studied at night, and dreamed of a future that, even though uncertain, still felt promising. I believed that everything happened at the right time, and when he appeared, it was impossible not to believe that it was my time. We met by chance, the way so many stories begin. A casual encounter, a conversation that was supposed to last just a few minutes, but stretched on for hours. He was kind, attentive, and had that calm way about him that made the world feel less heavy. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. We started seeing each other more often. We talked about everything: fears, dreams, plans that didn't even exist yet but already felt real just by being spoken out loud. He listened to me, he respected me, he made me laugh on hard days. And little by little, without even realizing it, I was completely involved. What began as occasional meetups became routine. Good morning messages, calls before going to sleep, small but constant promises. He said he cared about me in a different way, and I believed him because everything about him felt sincere. As time passed, we began sharing more than just moments. We shared plans, we talked about living together, traveling, building something that was ours. I had never been the type to jump easily into relationships, but with him, everything felt natural, safe, right. The months went by far too quickly, and I was happy, maybe too happy to notice that not everything was as solid as it seemed. It was on an ordinary morning that my life began to change. A delay I tried to ignore, then another, until fear took over the place where Combe once lived. I bought a pharmacy pregnancy test almost without thinking, more out of obligation than conviction. When I saw the result, my legs gave out. Pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor for long minutes, trying to understand what that meant. My heart was racing, not just from fear, but from a strange mix of panic and hope. I wasn't ready, but I wasn't alone. At least, that's what I believed at the time. I spent the entire day thinking about how to tell him. I rehearsed sentences, imagined his reaction, even smiled to myself thinking he might be nervous but happy. After all, we talked so much about the future, about building something together. That night, I sent him a message saying I needed to talk. He replied, as always, naturally, said we'd see each other the next day. But the next day was nothing like I expected. He didn't show up. At first, I thought it was just an unexpected issue. I sent another message. No response. I called. It rang until it stopped. I tried again. Silence. The hours passed slowly, and that strange feeling began to grow in my chest, an uneasiness I couldn't quite explain. That night, I tried calling again. Nothing. The next morning, I woke up with my phone in my hand. No messages, no missed calls. I went to social media and noticed something strange. His profile was gone. I thought it was a mistake. I searched again. Nothing. My heart started pounding. I tried calling one more time, and then I saw something that made me freeze. I had been blocked. Phone, social media, everything. It was as if he had simply erased his existence from my life. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. I spent the following days trying to understand what had happened. I reread old conversations, searched for signs I might have ignored. I blamed myself, thought I had said something wrong, done something wrong, believed too much. But none of it made sense. I was pregnant and completely alone. Every failed attempt to contact him felt like a new abandonment. Every day without an answer deepened the fear, the pain, and the feeling that something terribly wrong had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, no explanation ever came. At that moment, I didn't know how I would survive. I didn't know how I would tell my family. I didn't know how I would raise a child on my own. All I knew was that the man who promised to stay left without looking back. And what I didn't yet realize was that this silence wasn't just cowardice. It was the beginning of a story that would take 7 years to knock on my door again. The days following his disappearance were the longest of my life. At first, I woke up every day expecting to find a message, a missed call, any sign that it had all been a misunderstanding. But my phone remained silent, a heavy silence that echoed inside me. I was pregnant, and for the first time, that word wasn't accompanied by joy, but by fear. I told my family a few days later. It wasn't easy to explain why the man who had seemed so present had simply vanished. The questions came one after another, and I had no answers to any of them, only tears and an emptiness that grew with every failed attempt to justify the unjustifiable. Some people distanced themselves, others tried to help in whatever way they could, but no one could fill the space he left behind, because it wasn't just the absence of a partner, it was the absence of explanations, of closure, of any kind of emotional dignity. As the weeks passed, my belly began to grow, and with it, reality imposed itself in a cruel way. Doctor's appointments alone, tests done in silence, waiting rooms full of happy couples while I pretended to be strong just to keep from breaking down. At night, the fear was even greater. I lay in bed holding my belly, talking to a life that didn't yet have a face but was already everything I had. I promised I would do the impossible to protect that baby, even without knowing how. I worked as long as I could, took extra shifts, did jobs I never imagined I would do. Every dollar was counted, every expense carefully planned. There was no room for mistakes when you're carrying a life inside you. Throughout the entire pregnancy, I tried to contact him countless times. I sent messages that were never read, made calls that were never answered, wrote texts that were never replied to. At times, I even doubted whether he had really existed at all, or if everything had been nothing more than a very well-crafted illusion. The day of the delivery arrived on a quiet, early morning. I was alone. No hands to hold, no words of encouragement from someone who had promised to be there. Just me, the pain, and the fear of not being enough. When I heard my son cry for the first time, something inside me changed. That sound erased, for a moment, all the pain I had been carrying for months. I had a reason to keep going. I held that tiny body in my arms and made a silent promise. He would never feel the abandonment I had felt. He would never wonder why he wasn't chosen. I would be both mother and father if I had to be. The first few years were hard, much harder than I ever imagined. Sleepless nights, overdue bills, decisions made with a tight chest. There were days I thought I wouldn't make it, days I cried in secret so I wouldn't scare my own child. As he grew, the questions began to surface. Where is my dad? At first, I dodged them. I said he was far away, that maybe one day he would show up. But over time, it became impossible to keep inventing answers. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to hurt a child who wasn't to blame for anything. So I told the truth the best way I could, that some people don't know how to stay, but that it had nothing to do with him. My son grew up strong, smart, curious. He had an easy smile and a sensitivity that moved me deeply. Without even realizing it, he saved me every single day. Every hug, every laugh, every loving mom was a reminder that, despite everything, I had done something right. 7 years passed. The pain that once was an open wound became a scar. It didn't hurt every day anymore, but it was still there, silent. I no longer waited for him. I no longer searched for answers. Life had moved on, even if imperfectly. Until one ordinary night, after putting my son to bed, I heard someone knock on the door. It wasn't a strong knock, it was hesitant, as if whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. When I opened the door, the world seemed to stop. It was him. Older, tired eyes, the same face I thought I had forgotten, now standing in front of me, bringing back everything I had buried for 7 years. Before I could say anything, he spoke, his voice trembling. "I need to meet my son." In that moment, I realized that the past I tried to leave behind had just walked through the door of my home, and I still had no idea of the real reason he had disappeared, nor of what that visit would change forever. When I closed the door behind him, my legs gave out. I had spent 7 years imagining that moment, 7 years rehearsing what I would say if he ever had the courage to show up. Insults, accusations, unanswered questions. But when he was finally there, all I could feel was a strange emptiness, as if my body no longer knew how to react. He looked different, thinner, his face marked by time. His eyes carried something I couldn't quite recognize. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Still, it was impossible to deny it. I knew that man, every feature, every silence. I stood there, holding the doorknob while he said my name carefully, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. That irritated me. He had no right to be careful after everything. I asked what he wanted. He took a deep breath before answering, said he needed to talk to me, that he knew he didn't deserve to even be there, but that he had to try. The word needed sounded like an insult. I told him he had nothing to do with me anymore, not with me, not with my son, that life had gone on without him, that I had gone on. He nodded, as if he had expected that reaction, said he understood, that he would accept it if I told him to leave right then, but he asked for just a few minutes, said he had carried that weight for years, and that if he left without speaking, he would never have the courage to come back. Against all logic, I let him in. It wasn't an act of forgiveness, it was curiosity mixed with anger. I needed to hear him. I needed to understand how someone disappears like that and then thinks they can return as if time were just a detail. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where, years earlier, we talked about plans that never came true. The table felt smaller, the room colder. He kept his hands clasped together, avoiding my eyes for too long. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I asked where he had been. He started by saying that he had never stopped thinking about me, that even from far away, I had never left his mind. That made me want to laugh. I thought about all the nights I cried alone, every doctor's appointment without company, every one of my son's birthdays without a father present. I told him that thoughts don't make up for abandonment. He lowered his head, agreed, said there was no excuse that could erase what he had done, but he insisted he needed to explain, not to be forgiven, but so I would understand that he hadn't disappeared because he didn't love me. That sentence hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I asked why he blocked my number, why he erased everything, why he left me pregnant without a single word. He took a long time to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. He said that, at the time, he thought silence would be less painful than an incomplete explanation, that he was afraid of saying something that could put me or the baby in danger. Danger. That word set off an alarm inside me. I asked what he was talking about. He replied that he couldn't tell me everything yet, that he needed my trust. That made me furious. 7 years with no news, and now he was asking for trust? I told him that trust was exactly what he destroyed when he disappeared. He stood up, walked a few steps around the kitchen, then stopped, as if organizing his thoughts. He said he understood if I never forgave him, that he didn't expect that, but that he needed to meet his son, that he needed to look into the eyes of the child he had never forgotten. My entire body reacted to that sentence. I told him my son was not his necessity, not a patch for a guilty conscience. He was a happy child who didn't need a stranger showing up and confusing everything. He agreed, again, said he didn't want to suddenly appear in the boy's life, that he knew he had to earn any kind of closeness. But there was something urgent, something that could no longer be delayed. I asked what it was. He took a deep breath, looked directly at me for the first time and said, "I didn't leave to run away from you. I left to save both of you." Those words hung in the air, too heavy to ignore. I wanted to scream that it made no sense, that nothing justified abandonment. But before I could say anything, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He said he didn't expect an immediate answer, that he just wanted me to think about it, and that he would only return if I allowed it. Before leaving, he turned back and added, "If I hadn't left, maybe neither of you would be here today." The door closed. I stayed alone in the kitchen for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel only anger. I felt fear, a new kind of fear, not born from the past, but from what was still to come. And deep down, I knew that this story was far from over. After he left that night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind like a poorly explained warning. To save both of you. That sentence wouldn't leave my head. I tried to convince myself it was just another attempt at manipulation, a desperate way to justify the unjustifiable. But there was something in his eyes that unsettled me. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't indifference, it was fear. In the days that followed, I tried to avoid thinking about him. I focused on routine, on work, on simple tasks that helped keep my feet on the ground. My son continued living his normal life, unaware of the silent storm forming inside me. Watching him was both a relief and a burden. I needed to protect him from anything that could hurt him, including his own father. Still, curiosity grew, and with it, the need for answers. He was the one who reached out again. This time, he didn't knock on my door. He sent a message, an unknown number. Few words, direct, no pressure. He said he only wanted to explain, that if, after that, I still wanted him to disappear for good, he would accept it. I took hours to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part needed to hear him, not for him, but for myself. I needed to close that chapter somehow. We agreed to meet in a public place, a simple cafe, far from my home, far from my son. When I arrived, he was already there. He looked even more tired than the last time, as if the weight of the past was always in front of him, never behind. We sat in silence for a few minutes. It was strange to look at the man who had once been part of my plans and now felt like a stranger. He began by talking about his life before he met me. He said he had always lived trying to run from his own choices, that he got involved with the wrong people at a young age, drawn by easy money and quick promises. At first, it felt like control. Later, it became a prison, debts that kept growing, favors that came at a high price, people who didn't accept no as an answer. I listened with a tight chest, not because I felt sorry for him, but because I was beginning to understand the size of the problem. He said that when he met me, he tried to change, that for the first time he wanted to do things differently. He said I represented a life he believed he didn't deserve, a clean, peaceful life, far from the chaos he carried. When he found out I was pregnant, fear took over. According to him, shortly after that, he received direct threats. people who knew where he worked, where he lived, people who could easily find out who I was. He said they'd tried to use him, demanded money he no longer had, and made it clear that any weakness would be exploited, and me, pregnant, was the greatest weakness of all. He said he looked for help, tried to get out of that cycle, but the more he tried, the more trapped he became, until he received a final warning, an ultimatum. Either he disappeared or someone close to him would pay the price. Hearing that made my stomach turn. I asked why he didn't tell me, why he didn't trust me, why he left me in the dark. He said he didn't know how to explain without putting me at risk, that he believed, wrongly, that silence would keep me safe, that walking away would be the only way to make sure no one would reach me. He said disappearing was the hardest decision of his life. I didn't respond. There was too much pain there to be processed in just a few words. He went on. He told me he spent years living far away, moving from city to city, working whatever jobs he could find, always afraid of being found, always looking over his shoulder. He said he followed my life from a distance whenever he could, that he knew about our son's birth, that he cried alone imagining what he had lost. That confession hit me in an unexpected way. Even so, something didn't add up. I asked why he came back now, why after 7 years he decided to show up. He hesitated, his gaze shifted, his hands trembled slightly. He said he only came back because he was sure those people were no longer a threat, that the debts had been settled, that the danger had passed. But there was something else, something he still wasn't ready to say. Before we parted, he said he needed to tell me the full truth, but that truth involved a difficult decision, one that could change everything. When I left that cafe, I felt like a piece of the puzzle had been revealed, but the picture was still incomplete. Something was being hidden, something too big to be said out loud at that moment. And I knew that when that truth finally came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. After that conversation at the cafe, I spent days trying to pretend everything was normal. I kept working, preparing meals, helping my son with his schoolwork, listening carefully to his stories. But inside, my mind was far away. Every word he had said came back like an insistent echo. I felt there was something more, something he was avoiding saying, a weight that made his explanations feel incomplete. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the feeling that this story hadn't been fully told followed me everywhere. He was the one who reached out again. This time, he asked to talk calmly. He said he couldn't put it off any longer, that he needed to be honest even if it meant losing me for good. I agreed to meet him again, but I set one condition: no lies, no evasions. If he was going to talk, it had to be everything. We met at the same cafe. The atmosphere was different. There wasn't exaggerated tension, but a deep exhaustion, as if we both knew that meeting would change something forever. He started by apologizing, not the empty apologies said out of obligation, but a simple, almost restrained apology. He said he knew no explanation could erase the abandonment, that he knew he left me alone at the most vulnerable moment of my life, and that living with that had been the daily punishment he carried for years. Then he took a deep breath and began talking about his own body. He said that for some time he had been experiencing strange symptoms: extreme fatigue, frequent pain, mild fainting spells. At first, he ignored them. Later, he sought medical help. The tests brought an answer he never expected to hear: a rare genetic disease. He explained that it wasn't immediate, but progressive, that it could be controlled for a while, but without proper treatment, it would become serious. He said he spent years denying its severity, trying to keep life going as if nothing were happening, until the doctors were clear: The treatment would require very specific genetic compatibility, and the greatest chances would come from a biological child. When he said that, a chill ran through my entire body. My son. Everything began to make cruel sense. The sudden return, the urgency, the request to meet him. It wasn't just regret, there was a real need behind it. Anger took over me. I asked if that was the only reason he had come back, if everything was nothing more than a desperate attempt to save himself, using the one thing I had protected for years. He didn't deny it, but he didn't directly confirm it either. He said he hadn't come back only for himself, that he would never have had the courage to show up if he didn't believe that, in some way, he also needed to face the past. But he admitted that the illness was the final push. I stood up from the table, feeling the world spin. I said it was unfair, that he had already taken too much from me, that he had no right to place that responsibility on a child. He remained seated, silent. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost broken. He said he expected nothing, that he didn't want to demand anything, that he just needed to try, that if I said no, he would accept it. He said living with the disease would be easier than living knowing he never tried. I went back home with my head full. I spent hours watching my son sleep, observing every detail of his face, every calm breath. I thought about everything we had been through together. I thought about the strength that boy had without even knowing it. I thought about the kind of person I was raising. Deep down, I knew the decision wasn't just about his father. It was about who my son would become as he grew up. Denying help out of anger, or allowing something difficult out of compassion. That night, I understood that some decisions don't have a right answer, only different consequences. And for the first time, I realized that the next chapter of our story would require a choice I never imagined I would have to make. After that conversation, nothing felt simple anymore. I carried the decision with me like an invisible weight. It wasn't something I could share with just anyone. It wasn't an ordinary choice. It involved the past, pain, forgiveness, and above all, my son's future. In the days that followed, I avoided giving an answer. I told him I needed time. He didn't insist. For the first time, he respected my silence. Maybe because he knew he had no right to demand anything. My son continued his routine, unaware of the storm that was forming. He went to school, talked about his friends, complained about homework, laughed at simple things. Watching him was like looking at everything I had fought to protect. Every gesture of his was proof that, despite all the difficulties, I had done something right. But life doesn't allow us to choose only between what's easy and what's comfortable. I spoke with doctors. I asked hard questions. I tried to understand every detail of what could happen. I learned that the tests wouldn't cause pain, that the process would be safe, that my son wouldn't face immediate risks. Still, none of that made the decision any lighter, because allowing it meant opening a door I had kept closed for 7 years. I spent sleepless nights remembering everything I had lived through, the abandonment, the loneliness, the fear, the tears no one saw. And even so, something inside me told me that this decision couldn't be made based only on the pain I had felt. I needed to think about the man my son was becoming. In the end, I called his father to talk. It was the hardest conversation of my life. I told him I would allow the tests, but I made it clear that it didn't erase the past, that it didn't mean automatic forgiveness, that he wouldn't earn a place in our lives simply because he needed help. He listened to everything in silence, agreed to every condition, said he accepted any boundaries I set, that he didn't want to force his presence, that he only wanted to do whatever was possible. On the day of the tests, my son held my hand tightly. He asked if everything was okay. I smiled and said yes. I told him he was strong, stronger than he imagined. And he went, without crying,
without complaining, with a courage that broke my heart into pieces and rebuilt it at the same time. The weeks of waiting were long. When the results arrived, I felt the ground disappear beneath me again. Compatible. My son could help. The procedure happened shortly after. It was a tense period, but everything went well. My son recovered quickly. He smiled again, played again, went back to being a child. That was the greatest relief of my life. His father recovered too, slowly, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time, I saw someone who was truly remorseful, not through words, but through actions. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand space. He was simply present when he was allowed to be. One day, my son asked who he was. I took a deep breath and told the truth. I said he was someone who had made wrong choices, someone who left when he shouldn't have, but someone who was now trying to do better. I said that not all stories start the right way, but some can still change. My son listened carefully, thought for a few seconds. Then he said something I will never forget. If he's trying, I think that counts. In that moment, I understood that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, it's about deciding what to do with it. Today, our life isn't perfect. It isn't a movie ending, but it's real. We're not a traditional family. We're something that was broken and rebuilt in a different way, with boundaries, with care, with truth. I learned that some people disappear not because they stop loving, but because they don't know how to deal with who they've become. I learned that pain can harden you, but it can also teach you, and that love sometimes doesn't return the way we expect, but it returns the way it needs to. Life didn't give us back the years we lost, but it gave us something rarer, the chance to write with awareness and courage.